Welcome to the Center for the Economics of the Internet here at the Hudson Institute. My name is Harold Birchcott-Roth, and we're very pleased today to have Reed Hundt, former chairman of the FCC and accomplished in many other ways. Before we begin today's program, I want to do a few house cleaning things. First of all, our next session will be December 12th with Stephen Crocker, the chairman of ICON, will be speaking about recent developments at the ITU and about internet governance and some new developments there. On December 18th, we have Richard Wiley, former chairman of the FCC, will come speak to the center. Looking far ahead, March 7th, we have Commissioner Pai from the FCC coming to speak, and in January and February we'll have some other seminars, and I'm working on lining up the speakers for those. In a sign that the economy will still yet grow, I have not yet filled my research assistant position here at the center. For those of you who have not turned in your CVs, please do so at the Hudson website. Now, turning to the main events today, I also want to welcome our online audience, and for those online folks who have questions, please send them. What is our Twitter hashtag? Is it at Hudson Institute? So we look forward to questions from our online audience. The Hudson Institute was founded about 50 years ago by a fellow named Herman Kahn. And Herman Kahn was a great futurist. He was a larger-than-life fellow, both figuratively and literally, and he wrote about things that turned out to be quite prescient. He was a great thinker about nuclear warfare, developed new concepts for nuclear policy. He wrote about the Vietnam War in ways that were different at the time, and that in ways that turned out to be exactly true. He wrote a book in 1970 about what the year 2000 would look like, and again, it turned out to be remarkably accurate. He, in fact, is often thought of as one of the very first futurists. Well, who are the Herman Kahns of the world today? Let me suggest to you that one of those is sitting with me right now. Reed Hundt has many of the same characteristics of Herman Kahn. He addresses big problems, not small problems, not small ball. He addresses big issues. He's not afraid to take on big issues, and he's not afraid to suggest new ideas. And he also deals with the future. Reed is always looking 5, 10, 20 years out. I remember being on a panel with him, it must have been about 10 years ago, and you were talking about big broadband. You were talking about what seemed at the time what no one else was talking about, 100 meg to every home in America, which at the time when people were struggling to get 10 seemed very unusual. Well, looking back, 100 meg is widely available in the United States today, and Reed was just a little bit ahead of his time. Mm-hmm. Reed and one of his colleagues, Blair Levin, have written a new book called The Politics of Abundance. Again, it's talking about the future in about two areas. One has to do with broadband, the other has to do with energy policy. It's my great pleasure to welcome to the Center for the Economics of the Internet, Reed Hundt, who is going to give us, I gather, a brief overview about your new book, and then we'll have a discussion about some of the issues, particularly those that are more related to the Internet.
Thank you, Harold. Thank you for those very, very kind comments, and thanks to all of you for coming out. A special hello to Jim Casserly here, with whom I had the pleasure of working at the FCC back in the Clinton administration. I'm going to talk a little bit about the lessons of the Clinton administration, but what you're going to hear from me on this topic is not conventional wisdom about the Clinton administration, which means that it might be right, it might be wrong, but at least it'll be a little bit different than most of the received commentary. I do want to start by not just thanking Harold, but speaking to my Republican bona fides. The Telecom Act of 1996, which empowered the FCC to shift quite radically the regulatory paradigm, was passed by a Republican House and a Republican Senate, 77 votes in the Senate, and more than 400 votes in the House. And it was implemented by an FCC that on almost every single issue voted unanimously. I don't remember precisely, but it was something like 98 or 99% of all of our votes when Jim and I were there together were cast by Republicans and Democrats together. There are a couple of reasons. One reason is practical and one reason is ideological. The ideological reason is that the great shift in the regulatory paradigm was the shift from choosing to endorse monopoly and regulate it, that's the 1930s approach to telecom, to choosing to endorse competition and deregulating prices. That's the exact same shift that had previously occurred in the aviation industry with the elimination of the CAB. It had also occurred in trucking, and the Interstate Commerce Commission was actually eliminated, in, if I recall correctly, in the early days of the Clinton administration. And so that same shift, the abandonment of the idea of state-sponsored monopoly with tight regulation, that same shift came to communications fundamentally with a economics route as opposed to a political route. And when it was adopted by the two parties, it wasn't easy, but it wasn't impossible for them to proceed to create national legislation that in turn would order state regulators to accept this utterly different paradigm. There's only one major utility left that still operates under the old pre-1970s view. There's only one major utility that underlies everything in every developed economy, where the paradigm is to endorse monopoly, to shroud monopoly with regulatory protection against innovation, and then to regulate it within a hair's breadth of economic survival, meaning to allow only a tiny recovery of capital. That monopoly is the electric grid. It's the last redoubt of pre-competition thinking, pre-Chicago School thinking, early First New Deal thinking, and it's a big problem that redoubt has not been overcome. It would be a wonderful thing if in 2013, 2014, we see a Congress that is divided between Republicans and Democrats. If we see that Congress say, geez, you know, why don't we address the need to shift to a sustainable and efficient energy platform? Why don't we address this not by having a tax policy that taxes and regulates every form of economic activity, but instead let's alter the structure of regulation to open the door to innovation, to competition, to choice, and then attracts private investment in a prodigious volume in order to give us a completely different energy platform. That's one of the two stories of this book. There isn't much of a constituency in political terms as in the history of energy for what I've just described. However, happily, in the last 4 years, technological breakthroughs have created the possibility of completely different political constituencies in the energy field. In a second, I'm just going to use a slide to show you that the molecules are out there now, and a new chemistry of politics could put them together, and we actually could have a pretty amazing piece of national legislation, not very long, not very long, maybe 100 pages, and have it basically say to state regulators, time to open the doors to innovation. Something I've learned about legislation, if it's more than 100 pages, you're in the danger zone. If it's more than 1,000 pages, almost certainly Congress is going too far, and you are in an area where if you push button A, you're going to ring bell B. The cap and trade bill of 2009 was well more than 1,000 pages. The Telecom Act of 1996 was about 150 pages. Better to be short, conceptual, delegate regulatory authority, and establish the basic precepts. So that's one of the two pieces of this book. The other piece of the book is a way to think about what's happened in broadband, what's happened over the 20 years since Jim and I were at the FCC, what happened during the years that Harold came after us, what's happened through Republican and Democratic administrations in a pretty steady way. One thing that cannot be said about the communications revolution in America is that it was a product of the thinking of Democrats or the thinking of Republicans. It clearly has its roots in a bipartisan and ideological consensus about having a competition paradigm and opening the door to innovation. What's really, really interesting and important is that we're now at a moment in history where we are looking at another turn of the wheel of change, and we have the opportunity, those of us who meddle in government and inside and outside, we have the opportunity to spin that wheel just a little bit faster and produce the fundamental goal, the only right goal of all economic policy, according to Michael Porter in his book, The Competitive Advantage of Nations, and that is this. The only right goal of economic policy is to take actions that are designed to produce a high and rising standard of living for the citizens of the country. High and rising. And a high and rising standard of living turns out to be identical to the American dream. So if that's the goal, we actually have the opportunity to move toward this goal in a very, very rapid way with respect to the two electromagnetic platforms that underlie the whole economy. So that's what the book is about. It's an ebook. I love the whole idea. I was telling Harold, this is the only way to write. Blair and I had this idea. That means he gave me the idea and told me to do the footnotes in August. We worked a lot from August to the middle of October. But then you push this button on this thing called the internet, and what do you know? The ebook is quote e-printed, and in this case, 15 days later. It is true that we had to bet that there would be a re-election of Obama because we had to commit to the title, establish his legacy. But it's pretty nice to be able to offer something into the public debate where you have a chance of having your thoughts be e-published in a timely manner. Nevertheless, it doesn't go anywhere without the opportunity to talk to folks like you and to talk to Harold. And so thanks again for giving me that time. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip through the slides. Again, thanks to the internet, you can download them for free at www.politicsofabundance.com. And instead of talking to the slides, I'm just going to give you a few of the things that are between the lines. Here's the first thing that's between the lines. Politics of Abundance is meant to be a polite but direct and robust refutation of the book called The Era of Scarcity, written by Thomas Edsall about 6 months ago. Edsall's a great journalist. His book says everybody loses in the future. It's a zero-sum game. We got to decide whether the seniors lose more than the young people, or the young people lose more than the seniors, or the Midwest loses and the coast wins. But it's all about looking at a shrinking pie and deciding who gets the smallest of the slices, and everyone's getting a smaller slice. Another version of that is the argument by a very, very estimable economist at George Mason, Tyler Cohen, who says that the era of innovation is run out. There are still other people who are writing material now that says that the long-term growth rate in the United States is going to be 2 to 2.5%. This book says that's not necessarily right, that these are not predetermined, that these predictions about growth are a function of two things. They're a function of what do you really believe about technological innovation, and they're a function of the political system in which technological innovation does or doesn't have a chance to get to the market. All strategy, the book says the government, like businesses, ought to have a strategy. All strategy starts in just one place. I spent 10 years at McKinsey. We used to charge people $1 million for what I'm now going to tell you for free, which is the starting point of strategy is figuring out what problem you're trying to solve. This is not easy. No one agrees on what problem we're trying to solve in America today. And it is incredibly easy. It is almost certain that in Washington, a tactical debate is taken to be a strategic discussion. What's a tactical debate? A tactical debate is what to do about the fiscal cliff. That's a tactical debate. The president's views are that he won the election, and if it was about anything, which is debatable, if it was about anything, it was about the fact that the majority were voting to have the existing law, which raises the income tax for pretty much everybody, be repealed for everybody except those who make more than $250,000. That's a tactical debate. It's about moving the dividing line for the marginal income tax rate. But a strategic debate would be, what problem are you trying to solve when you're doing that? This is our assertion. This is the problem you're trying to solve. You're trying to have the economy return to that blue line, which is real potential gross domestic product. And you're trying to get off of that red line. The huge dip down, of course, is the collapse of the economy in the Great Recession, but the very slight incline in the red line is the same as the slow recovery. And if that looked like a valley and the red line were back on the blue, then a whole bunch of things would not be true. It wouldn't be true that the median income of households in America is now at a lower point than it's been in 20 years, something like that. It wouldn't be true that, as Governor Romney correctly said, something like 23 million people are looking for full-time employment. A whole bunch of ailments and illnesses in the economy wouldn't exist if that red line were at the blue line. What's the first way to solve this problem? Do you increase taxes and cut spending? That's the fiscal cliff issue. Or do you adopt a growth strategy that increases national income, increases tax revenue, and puts more people to work? Well, we know that the answer to this problem is not increase taxes and cut spending. How do we know that? Because everybody, Republican, Democrats, business, academics, everyone says that if the existing law goes into effect, it will increase taxes and cut spending and send us into a recession. So we know that measure is not the way to address what we're saying is the central problem. That activity, increase taxes and cut spending, is about a different problem. It's about the long-run imbalance between revenues and spending, but it's about the long-run imbalance. It's about an imbalance that is worrisome, but is not worrisome in the next several years. It is worrisome in some out years. I'm not saying it's not a problem. I'm saying if you start with this definition, then you end up with the left-hand side being your solution set. Now, at the bottom, the ratio of the publicly held debt to GDP must be stabilized. I don't think any reasonable people disagree about that. But what's the easiest way to stabilize it? Not the only way, but the easiest way. And the easiest way to stabilize it is the lesson of the Clinton administration, and this is where I'm saying this is not received, not the way that the story is often told. 1995 is on the left, 2001 is on the right. The green line is the drop in the debt to GDP ratio. The axis for that is on the far right. It drops from 50% to 30%. Right now it's about 72%. Very, very high. But this 20-point drop in the debt to GDP ratio did not come from tax policy. It did not come from spending policy. This is a ratio. We got the debt on the top, we got the GDP on the bottom. If the GDP goes way up, that's called the denominator, and the ratio goes way down. The blue line is the way the GDP grew, and it's the growth of the GDP in those golden years, called the fabulous decade by economist Alan Blinder. It's the growth of the GDP in those years that dropped the debt to GDP ratio. That came from the tech-driven boom in private sector investment. Let me just summarize all private sector investment from 1995 to this day in the communication. Pat your pocket. Remember whether you turned that device off or not. This gentleman in the front row forgot to do it. Think about your computer with the chip in it. Every single thing that you use to communicate. Every connected computing device. All the ways that we're watching streaming video on TV, they all are built on networks and use technologies that did not exist prior to roughly 1995. Not any of the previous technologies are still in use. Not any of the networks are still in use. The most that's in use is the same ditch. And there was not any significant federal taxpayer spending to make any of that happen. It's a fairly remarkable fact. We didn't, as we did with the railroads, give 10% of all the public property of the United States to railroads to build the transcontinental railroads. We didn't do that with communications. It's more than $1 trillion of private sector investment that translated to 10,000 job years per billion, which is a lot of job years, that produced all by itself 2.1 million net new jobs just in ICT. That's the blue actual GDP growth. The red that declines is what CBO predicted would happen. The blue that happened, the actual growth, is a lot higher than the red. Between those two is the explanation for the budget surpluses of the last 3 years of the Clinton administration. It was not the case that raising taxes and cutting spending produced this outcome. Raising taxes and cutting spending produced fiscal prudence and did not threaten the growth. And it convinced the Fed not to take away the punch bowl, and it did produce an overarching low cost of capital. So it was a good thing. But it was the tech-driven growth that produced the actual benefits. Those top lines, not the green at the bottom, those top lines are the arcs of the curve of the ratio, the debt to GDP ratio over the years. The one at the bottom is the most rigorous, that's the Ryan budget. The one at the top is the most patient, that's the Obama budget of 2011, and all the others are the in-between versions. And they all do this. They all do stop the alarming growth of that ratio after first inflicting a couple of bad years. They all do that. They first inflict bad years because when you raise taxes and cut spending, you produce an economic drag, not a plus. But the green is if you don't do any of these things and just repeat the 1995-2000 growth of the GDP, meaning that's the way you get the best possible result. I'm not saying that it's wrong to be fiscally prudent. I'm saying that not having a growth agenda is a policy sin and is a cruelty that doesn't need to be inflicted. So I'm going to hurry through now so that we can have time to chat, and I'm just going to skip. But as I said, you can get these slides at politicsofabundance.com for free, or you can download this book on your Kindle for $1.99. But here's what I want to show about why these two sectors matter. This pie chart is all market capitalization of public companies in America. That's a lot of wealth. Where do we find the wealth of America? In the red over there in the 3 to 5 o'clock, and in the yellow down there in the 5 to 6 o'clock range. That's the knowledge sector and the power sector. Knowledge is almost as big as financials. Knowledge is more than twice the size of materials or industrials or healthcare. It's almost twice consumer discretion. Power is bigger than material, industrial, healthcare, consumer discretion, consumer staples. These are huge sectors of the economy. Yes, I'm including everything in them. They all ought to be included. You want to include Yahoo as well as AT&T. You don't get Yahoo without AT&T or without cable or without some underlying platform. And these are complementary products. You can't buy the computer without the communications, or you can, but nobody would. So when you add all these interlinked complementary products together, you end up saying, gosh, these sectors are really, really huge, and that's why the iPhone 5 purchases have been estimated to increase GDP by 0.5 point. That couldn't be true if these sectors weren't really, really huge. What does that mean? It means this. If you get growth in these sectors, you're doing much, much more to have overall economic growth than if you get growth in the industrial sector. In the healthcare sector, you actually want that to be smaller, not bigger. That's what it means to be talking about Medicare expenses going down. You can say, let's have consumer spend, consumer discretionary, but if consumer discretionary is only 10% and the knowledge platform is 18%, you're going to have to have a lot more growth in consumer spending to equal relatively smaller growth in the knowledge platform. This is just math. But in business, Bill Gates was once asked, what do you spend most of your time on? And he said, I spend 90% of my time thinking about where 90% of my revenue comes from. If you're doing government policy, you should spend most of your time thinking about how to have your big sectors grow in a sustainable way. In the knowledge platform, the IT jobs are the bright blue line, and they've performed better than the red, which is the U.S. average, better than food service, better than retail. The bandwidth growth has been huge and prospectively is going to be staggeringly bigger. These are two moonshots that we could have. All students in 4 years, access to safe, secure education data, everybody with access to health data exchange. The book says this. I'll say this and then move quickly to energy and then wrap up. The book says this: the big driver that can make the knowledge platform grow is at the services level, not at the underlying level of the networks. Why? Because in fact, we have incredibly robust networks. In fact, Jim can talk about this probably more knowledgeably than I because he knows so much about the cable industry, but we already have rolled out, not yet purchased, but we already have rolled out the most robust physical broadband network of any big country in the world. What we don't have yet, but what we can have, is a rapid migration of all public services as applications on top of that platform. And the two big examples are in education and healthcare. And what we see now in those areas is nothing compared to what you see if you want to use Spotify to buy music, or if you want to use Amazon to get downstreamed video. In other words, what we see in the entertainment sector gives us a clue of what would be possible in the education and in the healthcare sector. So what we've got in here is the idea that Congress ought to pass a law that says we should have a digital transition commission that looks just like the base closing commission. So Congress forever could not figure out how to decide to close certain military bases, so they passed a law saying they would delegate that job to a panel and they would empower them legally to make rational decisions, and it's worked very, very, very well. Let's create a digital transition commission. Let's put CTOs and CEOs and CIOs on it. Let's have Harold be its executive director, if we could get him. And let's have that commission migrate all public services, particularly health and education, to that platform. This isn't going to cost a lot of money. It's going to produce tremendous growth, and most importantly, it'll produce more value in the networks, and so we'll see the demand for the bandwidth go up. On the energy side, so this is the fundamental problem, and you know, I spent a lot of time on both coasts and in different places, and whenever I'm in California, I always run into somebody who says, how come nobody in Washington understands climate change? It's not right. I have actually never met anyone in Washington who doesn't believe that there's man-made emissions that are causing climate change. There might be some people that don't accept all the political proposals for dealing with it, but this is not, you know, we're not a country of denialists. That's not my understanding, and everyone knows that we actually now are looking at less than 16 years before climate change becomes irreversible and irreversibly catastrophic. Here's a way to think about it. As an actuarial matter, everybody age 65 or under will see, if current trends are not changed, everybody age 65 or under will see devastation wreck the world. Not a very pretty picture. Long before Social Security goes bankrupt, decades before, we will see the rise of the waters that eliminate Miami, eliminate it completely, that make New York City uninhabitable below 24th Street. I could go on. And there's no serious debate about it. The debate is about what do we do. Here's the good news. This is the Moore's Law curve for the price of solar. This is just 3 years. The price has dropped from the high there, which is nearly 3, down to less than 1. This is the panel price. It's just one example of the Moore's Law curve breakthroughs that have occurred in the last few years in electricity. This is what you can do with low-cost financing. On the right, you see the retail price on the vertical axis. On the horizontal axis, you see the impact of providing low-cost financing. If you provide 40% of the capital in low-cost financing, you can lower the retail price for the clean electricity below 10 cents. 10 cents is the national average. How can this possibly be? In just 4 years, the fundamental cost of clean energy has dropped so much that now if you provide low-cost capital as part of the financing structure, you can lower the price below the national average. So we have a choice. Why don't we tax the heck out of everybody and make all the consumers lose? Or why don't we provide low-cost financing that will have it be that everybody pays less for electricity? And even if consumers is not your primary goal, every business in America that could move its plant overseas is more likely to stay here if they get cheap electricity. It's already the case that the low price of natural gas are causing American industries to stay in the U.S. or even to relocate back to the U.S. because energy is a huge input cost to every business in the world, in the United States, and in every developed economy. Just one example. Energy is the biggest single component cost of all data centers and all data storage in the United States, and data centers use 2% of all the electricity in the United States. Developed economies run on 2 electromagnetic platforms, electricity and communications. And if those costs go down, the economy is stronger. So I'm going to now really wrap up and just say here's the 4 things that Congress could do. And they're all described here as trade-offs. There are many possible trade-offs. These are all about what will be in step 2. Step 1 is going to be postponing the sequestration and finding a balance on the income tax issue. And that'll be done by Christmas, approximately. I don't know why, but everyone seems to think it'll be done on December 21. That'll be the day. Maybe everyone has their vacations planned for the next day, right? But right after that comes step 2, and step 2 is what do we do in 2013. So in conclusion, and thanks, these are the suggestions. At the top, let's have an emissions tax, and since that's a revenue raiser, let's have a compromise on the income tax issue that on an enduring basis. An emissions tax is not the same as a carbon tax. A carbon tax taxes every product that uses energy. That's everything. It's effectively a sales tax. An emissions tax is much more narrow. You say to an electric utility, if you're selling electricity that was generated by a technique that produced greenhouse gas emissions, then you have to pay a tax and you can't pass it on. And you can't pass it on. Why do you do it that way? Because you want the utility to want to avoid that tax. It's a sin tax, a PGU tax. You know. Number 2, let's have not just corporate tax reform, which we need. Let's have one particular kind of corporation also get reform, and that's utilities. And I talked about that already. Let's say to all the electric utilities in the United States, no longer are you going to be regulated within an inch of your corporate existence. You're going to actually get a reward if you invest in sustainable energy and energy efficiency. Number 3, let's bring back the offshore profits, $1.7 trillion of American cash earned by American businesses and American workers sitting overseas. Let's strike a compromise, but let's have part of the compromise be that some of the cash capitalizes a low-cost financing authority. This is not an innovation. Low-cost financing is what we do at OPEC to support exports. It's what we do at the Exim Bank to support exports and imports. Low-cost financing is what EPA offers states for sewage. Low-cost financing is what the Department of Agriculture extends to rural telephone companies in order to build telephone networks where there isn't enough population to sustain the actual cost. Low-cost financing is what we use for low-income housing. Low-cost financing is used in a number of ways to lower the retail price that covers the cost. So let's have low-cost financing expand the 2 electromagnetic platforms. And lastly, the Digital Transition Commission, which I already discussed. So those are the ideas. The wonderful thing about the ebook is if you all give me a better idea, I just get to go and erase the e-publication and paste in your better idea and claim it for my own. Thank you very much.
Reed, thank you very much. As I said in the introduction, Reed is a futurist. He thinks in big ideas, and he has certainly entertained us this morning with his views of the future and his big ideas for the future. I'd like to drill down particularly on the first part of your book, which addresses broadband, and you have a chapter on the future of broadband, and there are 5 sections, not necessarily in this order, but there's get more broadband out, go to a digital government, digital healthcare, digital education, and a more digital public safety. And I think these are all great ideas. I really do. It strikes me as interesting that the market is headed in these directions already. You don't have, where the book suggests major new legislation, it's more on the energy side than it is on the information side, if you will. And so what I'd like to do is kind of walk through each of these areas and get your thoughts in more detail about where you see the future of information in each of these areas. And let me start with my favorite and your idea of the Digital Transition Commission, and that is government services. And I think all Americans have had frustrating experiences in dealing with paper or government services, whether it's tax forms or employment forms or property documents. We're aswim in just masses of paper that don't really make a lot of sense. And I think your book very convincingly talks about going to more of an electronic-based government services. Could you just elaborate a little bit on where you see that going?
Sure. So just first of all, kind of a starting point, particularly in democracies, but certainly in information economies, I think it's useful to follow the following precept. Government is not likely to be able to change culture, and probably shouldn't actually be in the business of trying to change culture. Government should be responsive to culture. That's really what a democracy is about, right? I mean, the culture should call for the policies that the web of values and beliefs feel are appropriate. Building on taking that large meta point and echoing you, Harold, if the technological trends did not permit the e-transformation of all services, you wouldn't want to try. It would be too difficult. If everybody in the country said, I really, really want to interact with the Social Security Administration by standing online, and I really want to see the paper, and I want to go to a window and have somebody show me how much money I would get if I retire, then you shouldn't say to them, no, you can't do that, you've got to buy a computer. But the trends are what they are. The trends are what they are. Everybody, not absolutely everybody, but almost everybody, and certainly everybody under a certain age, they're saying, look, I'd like to everything. It's faster, it's cheaper, it's easier, and most importantly, I get to add value by making my own choices. Now, you know, maybe you have to be my age to have this double experience. I guess you do have to be my age, nearly 65. But this is the way that I find out about Medicare, and this is the way I find out about Social Security. It's all EEE, right? So, let's not just wait for everyone to be 65. Let's go right down to the heart of the matter and say that the e-education experience ought to start at the point of catchment. Catchment is the day that under law, the child in America first is taken by parents or guardians, and by law must be enrolled in school. Let's let it start at on that day. Now, if you went to work at, I've been on the board of a lot of companies since I left the government. If you went to work at any company that I've been on the board of, the day you sign up as an employee, you get a digital identity. You get a digital profile. You have all of your information in a digital form, and it's secure. And many measures are taken to provide for security. I'm on the board of Intel. We have more than 100,000 employees, and they all live and work in a completely digital universe. We don't make them stand at a desk to sign a form that says you're now an employee. You take that exact same technological experience and apply that in education at the point of catchment, and you have then created a platform that can work forever for that child and for all the parents who care about that child. And what do you know? That exact same platform can be used for a savings plan. If the family wants to start saving money right away so that upon graduation, the child can go on, well, by then they'll be an adult, and go to a tertiary education institution for post-secondary education, the savings platform, can have worked. Now, these are not technologically complicated concepts. They were 5 or 10 years ago. They really aren't anymore. And we know from the entertainment experience, Amazon can tell you anything you want to know about your own wishes. But the same experience does not exist in education. The schools don't have the platforms that suggest reading material to the child or to the parent. The parent can't get suggestions from that platform about what the child really ought to be better at. But all those things are feasible. So those are ways to try to think about what that platform would look like. Is that responsive?
Sure. Well, let's follow up on education. Are there states, or this doesn't have to be done at the federal level, or at least initially, it could be done at the state or local level.
No, it doesn't. It should.
Are there states that are doing this for education, for example?
Some, and you see, another good thing about education is the charter school movement that creates competition, and you do see these platforms in some charter schools. States, I don't want to condemn all of them, but there are states that centralize the textbook decisions and the curriculum decisions, and that by centralizing them, close the door to experiment and to innovation. A little worse than that. By centralizing them, they end up at the point of decision, deciding to stick with paper and not to supplement paper with the e-textbook. So this is a really, really, really significant roadblock to the introduction of e-textbooks. I have one thing extra to say about this. E-textbooks do not need to replace paper books. They must be complements of paper books. You have paper right there. This book I have on paper slides here. But the difference is, with an e-textbook, you can constantly update it, and you can version a whole bunch of different things for the individual student, like testing, for example. So with an e-textbook, you can embed in the e-version a test, and the student online can take the test, and the test results may tell that student, really, you need to go back and reread Chapter 2, and if they want to reread Chapter 2 on paper, they can do that. It's not the same as it is for newspapers, which is you're doomed. But seeing the e-textbook and the e-platform as a complement, that's the breakthrough in thinking that isn't quite there yet.
We do see this at some private schools.
Yeah.
That have gone to
and we see some that say, our rule is turn off the smartphone all day. That's fine. There's nothing wrong with experiment. But if you there's so many things that can be done by constant updating and by individualization of education that you have to ask yourself, well, why wouldn't you want to have that be part of the race to the digital top?
As you point out in the book, the market is headed in this direction. Are we seeing any local school districts that are headed in the direction of going purely digital, or is everyone still clinging to paper?
I mean, some, but I think you don't need to say go all digital. I think you need to say everyone should have the digital complement. And in education, the fundamental precept that speaks to is no two alike. No two alike. That's what it speaks to. So my wife is a psychologist, and we have 3 kids, and before the first was born, she explained to me the following rule that we were going to live by, which is whatever was the number of children that we were lucky enough to have, they were going to be treated according to their individual differences, and they weren't all going to be replicas of their parents. This was a shocking idea that I had to get used to. But of course, what she was saying is a fundamental truth about individual rights, about liberty, and especially about brains, which is there's identicality is not the rule. So why would you want to have it be that when you know that no two people are alike, you would say, but our education system has to teach everyone exactly the same way? And once you commit to just ink on paper, you're saying rigidity and standardization is the rule instead of versioning and individualization.
And so in the book you have, as one of your man on the moon goals, you have create a digital account, if you will, for every student in America within a few years. You also have a goal on the healthcare side, which is another area which is just seems a wash in paper. There is a mandate in recent law, and yet I've heard from a lot of doctors the difficulty of the transition and some of the rigidities of the new electronic requirements that has caused some pushback, if you will. You could address the healthcare.
Electronic records. Every doctor, every healthcare provider needs to have a tablet. They need to enter directly into the tablet the data. That probably was the worst way to make the case for digital healthcare. When this whole concept emerged, which was within the last decade, that was kind of the same thing as saying to a big business, all those file cabinets really ought to be turned into digital format, and they ought to be put in a data center and stored. And all by itself, it's a good idea, but it has no real. It's very hard to see a productivity gain come out of that, all by itself. And of course, the doctors, all correctly understood. That's a lot more labor for me, and oh, by the way, whoever's paying me doesn't intend to pay me for that. And all of a sudden it seems like, well, it's just another regulatory burden. A more useful way to talk about e-health is what the smartphone and the tablet make clear with respect to entertainment and to all social activity, and that is this. The information that is important to an individual for continuous health care actually can be an app on a tablet or a smartphone. So this is where technological abundance is just crying out to be unleashed. Let me give you an example that this is from a conversation I had just 2 weeks ago. I was meeting with a fellow who's designed a computer chip that has carbon nanotubes on the surface, and these nanotubes connect to the silicon substrate. What's the point? The nanotubes react to chemicals, and they translate in that reaction into electric impulses that then are moved into the fundamental semiconductor processes that date back to the origination of the integrated circuit in the year of my birth. So why? Because those chemical processes, well, those are the same things as many medical tests. So, for example, you can use this chip to have instant diagnosis of blood levels everywhere, constantly. And so if you're diabetic, you can have that instant diagnosis, and it's all an integrated process, and the information can go directly back to the cloud, and then you can end up being the diabetic who has an application on the smartphone that pops up and says, you may not have realized this yet, but you need to have some sugar, or you've just had too much sugar, or in other words, you have instant analysis and instant remediation. Why does this matter? Because that person is not going to be in the hospital or in the emergency room, and they're going to be healthier. Their standard of living is higher, and our medical expenses go down. So this is so fanciful. Well, listen, when I was really, really young, there was polio, and then there was the Salk vaccine. And then all of a sudden, people said, well, we don't have to have polio. And there was a date before which there were no antibiotics and after which there were. And there was a date, before which, in other words, any medical innovation suddenly seems to be, it goes from being remarkable to commonplace. These innovations that come from instant diagnosis and from quick analysis in the cloud, these innovations are on the very verge of being commonplace. I think that it's much more powerful to talk about those kinds of things than to say to doctors, the federal government wants to make sure that you add a whole bunch of hours every day to digitizing your information. They'll want to digitize the information if they see the benefit in providing better health care.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Oh, it does. I'm on an advisory committee for a company that is, in fact, doing this.
You have another nanotube company?
Not a nanotube,
Okay.
but a wireless glucometer company that, in fact, is doing much of that right now. And a lot of this is going on today in the private sector. Tempted to say despite, but certainly a lot of the government bureaucracy is not helping out, I'll put it that way. And so I think the ideas that you have in your book about that, about going to a more digital-based service economy, would make a lot of sense. Why don't I open it up to a few questions from the audience, and then I have a few more to wrap up with. Our online viewers are welcome to submit questions, and why don't we take a few questions from our audience here? Yeah.
Hi, I'm David Tell here at Hudson. I'm curious about one of the first slides you showed us, the graph of potential as opposed to
Yep.
real growth. I'm wondering, on what basis did you make your determination about potential growth? And
The blue line?
yeah, and then as to the gap, I'm wondering how can we confidently distinguish that part of this gap that might be attributed to technology-related policy inadequacies or failures, and and what part? Some part of it must simply be the result of generalized economic and market exigencies. No.
Okay, so the blue line is just the following. Go back, I think it's to 1950,
Right.
and look at the oscillations in
Okay.
GDP, and then just do a regression and draw a straight line through the oscillation.
Okay. So I shouldn't assume that you've drawn as that. Okay. So
Right.
I just stupidly assumed that you were projecting the 2005 to 2007 numbers forward.
No.
No.
I mean, you could assume that because I didn't show what I just told you. But
Right.
the blue line is everyone agrees conventional mathematical.
Understood.
This is just the slope. You
Okay.
would naturally expect the
Understood.
red line to be sometimes above, sometimes below. But that's the steady state growth. Now, if you're a negative futurist, like some of the people I was mentioning, you would see that slope go flatter.
Right.
We didn't make it go flatter. We
I
just
understand.
went with the prevailing expectation, which I wanted to say is about 2.6%, but I may be slightly wrong. The red line, the precipitous drop off, and there's a shaded area in there. That's the Great Recession by the CBO definition, the OMB definition, any
Right.
widespread definition. And so that's just the collapse that actually began in the middle of 2007 and then gets really, really steep at in the winter of 2008, 2009.
And then the growth curve between 2009 and 2012.
That's just what we've seen.
That's what you've seen.
That's what we've seen. That's not extrapolated. That's just the record.
Okay, and so there's a gap between the post-1950 general trajectory, the blue
Right.
line, and the 2009 to 2012 growth line,
That's
which
correct.
is at the same rate, only an order of magnitude.
Well, it's a lower. The red line
slope is the
the
same.
red line
Right.
slope is not the
Right.
same. The red line slope is lower than the blue line slope, or in other words, it's a very long and slow recovery. That, I mean, the math is
Right,
that
okay.
it's been about 1+%
my
GDP
basic question
instead of
re-
2+.
My basic question remains, though, how much of the gap are you attributing to technology-related policy, failures of imagination, or inadequacies? And how, I mean, since it is just
Yeah.
a 3-year sample,
Right. Well,
markets and
well,
economies fluctuate
Yeah.
like that, deviate
Um,
from the
I'm not.
norm all the time.
So now opinions differ, right?
Yes.
In other words, you're asking a question about which opinions differ, right? So there would be the John Taylor view, which is that gap is significantly caused by deficit spending and by the stimulus. There would be the Krugman view, which is the gap exists because the stimulus was too small. We don't in this book try to explain why the gap exists.
Okay.
We try to instead say, whatever is the reason, here's a program to address it.
I understand.
And that's the premise of the book.
Thanks.
Reed, I haven't gone back and looked at the numbers, but it seems that your blue line of the congressional budget.
Yeah. Doesn't it say CBO there?
Yes,
Yeah.
it does. And potential GDP is a macroeconomic concept.
Understood.
It's usually based on full employment.
Yeah, that's right.
And so what they probably have done, I'm really surprised they thought we were at full employment from 2005 to 2007, but there you have it. And the growth rate is sort of based on historic average.
The part that I think isn't debatable is that gap is a way to use GDP to state, and so we have high unemployment, and so we have reduced tax revenues, and so we have a climbing ratio of debt to GDP because we didn't cut back the expenditures, and we have a smaller GDP.
Reed, I think you would agree. The technology policy is only one part of this, but I think the central message of Reed's book is that you really need to focus on economic growth as a solution, and he and Blair had some ideas that they believe would lead to economic growth.
That's right. That's right.
But it's not the only cause.
I do think that buried in between the lines is the following, which is it's probably not true that we as a society are doomed to continuing high structural unemployment. It's probably not true. That's a premise that is between the lines. If you have that view, which I don't, but if you have that view that we're doomed to structurally high unemployment, you still would want that red line to grow faster. Right? You still would want that slope to be higher. You wouldn't think that you'll get back to that blue line, but you still don't want a really small slope, a low growth rate.
Question over here.
It's somewhat of a side issue to the general discussion, but on the point you've just been making about those lines. Between 2005 and 2007, the construction industry, the construction industry, housing construction industry, did a very good nosedive, but overall, including employment, but overall employment did not. And it appeared that people who were being cut loose in the housing construction industry were finding employment elsewhere. And then at the end of 2007, the whole economy fell off the cliff. And I think CBO is right on what they're doing
there. That's fair. Unemployment rates in parts of the 90s were down around 4%. In parts of the 1960s as well, down around 4%. The unemployment rates 2005 to 2007, I don't think ever really got much below probably the mid-5.
But that's a very low number.
today, it would be a wonderful number.
Yeah.
But all I'm saying is that if you're assuming that you're going to measure potential GDP based on full employment, on the full use of resources in an economy, I'm not really sure we were there 5-7 years ago. So I find the CBO's estimate of potential GDP to be personally lacking in ambition of where this economy really could be. Reed, in your book, you also talk about public safety, and here we are, 11 years after 9/11. And I'm glad you addressed it. I personally find it a national disgrace that the lack of communication among public safety folks in a time of crisis, we still haven't really addressed that problem. And you discussed it, and why don't you give us some of your thoughts about that?
Well, yes, it's been a long debate. The idea of using broadcast TV spectrum for mobile communications, I'm happy to say that when I was in the Clinton administration, I was able to team up with John McCain and Bob Dole to advocate that idea. We were going to auction the broadcast spectrum. Jim remembers this. We got Senator Dole to go on the Senate floor and say it was the right idea. We got John McCain to be the champion of it. The broadcasters were able to bottle up this idea, but it reemerged in the 2008-2009 presidential transition in a different format, which was, well, if we can't just get the broadcast spectrum, let's have a auction technique that will permit broadcasters to get paid in effect by wireless companies, and then the broadcast spectrum will become wireless. That was passed last year. So the arc of history bends towards justice for broadcast spectrum over, this is a long story, right? This is 16 years. But where are we? The FCC in maybe a year and maybe in 18 months is going to hold an auction in which hopefully some broadcasters will sell their spectrum and wireless guys will buy their spectrum, and there'll be a chunk of change that's taken out of that auction and is spent on FirstNet. And that FirstNet is supposed to be the solution at last to the following fact, which is we have 4 major national broadband networks for business and social purposes. T-Mobile and Sprint and AT&T and Verizon each have one. They are very robust. They give you all kinds of bells and whistles, and we have nothing like that for public safety. So, hello, that's kind of dumb. Why don't we have all fire departments and all police and all first responders have access to the networks that all of us can use to download Angry Birds? So that's what FirstNet is supposed to do. We've finally got there. They did just pick the CEO. No, they said they were. They've defined the job and put it out for application. They've got a board run by a prominent former wireless company's CEO, Sam Ginn. You know, we should hope that this all comes to pass fairly soon. I'm optimistic. I just want to say one little thing about it. There is a cruelty in our society that is unnecessary. By and large, poor people live in high crime areas in significant part through no fault of their own. They cannot pay to live in low crime areas, which are more expensive to live in, and the local law enforcement is insufficient in their areas to reduce crime. let me put it another way. On a per capita basis, it's necessary to spend more money in high crime areas than in low crime areas. That's why there are high crime areas. They need more money needs to get spent to police more effectively. Poor people are the victims of the failure to allocate a police expense in these areas. Poor people, by and large, are not criminals. They are victims, right? On a proportional basis relative to rich people. What do you know? Technology can provide amazing solutions. Once again, we're on an in an era of abundance. Chicago is developing right now algorithms that permit the police department to predict that at certain intersections, at certain times, it is statistically likely that there will be certain kinds of crimes. How do they do this? They're just gathering data and putting it into computers and letting the computers be really, really smart. And what does it end up telling you? Go to 14th and such street and have an extra policeman there from 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. and you're going to see the crime rate drop by 52%. This is like right now. That's what FirstNet is supposed to permit. That's what it's supposed to permit for every community in the United States, not just for one that has Rahm Emanuel wanting to introduce computerized technology, but every single one. That's pretty cool. And by the way, the cost will go down.
Yeah, I have to say, I think the commission's coming up with an incredibly complicated way of addressing.
It's very complicated. It better work.
Boy, it's. I think it's complicated and very lengthy, very drawn out.
But you agree that would be a very cool outcome, right?
I think what you described would be a very cool outcome, and we definitely need to get there. I have a question here. This gentleman here.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Yonoyama from Mitsui Company, a Japanese multinational. Your suggestions are very attractive for even foreign investors. So what if to this attractive ecosystem, especially for broadband or infrastructure, FDI comes, is there good welcome or some concern about foreign investment, security-wise?
So infrastructure investment is a really, really big topic. I suspect that fairly soon you'll see Congress grappling with a proposal to invest in the infrastructure of New Jersey, New York, and Connecticut that was destroyed, and I think that this proposal will bring to the fore in a very vivid way the possibility of rethinking the way that infrastructure is financed and the way that it's rebuilt. So what I want to show you, is this chart. So really simplifying, there's two ways to think about infrastructure. One is that it is a non-productive asset. It's a road that nobody has to pay to travel on, and somebody someday has to, some taxpayer has to pay to repair or maintain. And there are such public goods that aren't really public goods because each additional user does impose some cost, right? But they're thought of as public goods. And I can understand, anybody can understand that you might want a lot of roads to be free. But there's a whole other class of infrastructure, and that is all infrastructure that does produce revenue. So everything in electricity produces revenue. All public transportation produces some revenue. Dams all produce revenue. In other words, most infrastructure actually produces revenue. If you provide really low-cost financing for infrastructure, which that horizontal line shows that the higher the low-cost financing, the lower the price. What it means is this. let's say you have to build a bridge. Low-cost financing means the toll for the bridge goes down. Low-cost financing in clean energy means the price you pay for the clean energy goes down. It's not a bad thing for a society to have transportation and electricity and education and healthcare be lower priced. That's not a bad thing. What you don't want is to provide the financing and have it be that it never gets paid off. So you absolutely want to have it be that in a commercial sense, you're going to get a guarantee. But that chart says that 40% of the financing for clean energy is low cost. Low cost in this case means, it's in the fine print on the side, it means 2% for over a 20-year loan. 60%, not in the chart, is high cost financing. The 60% comes from private investors. And behind this model, the private investors get a 13% annual return. That's a good number. That's a lot higher than what you'll see anywhere else. So we did not, this model was set up, there's a whole model behind this. This model was set up with the following principle. A complement of low-cost financing, but the majority of the capital for this particular infrastructure project would come from private sector investments, and we assumed a 13% return so that nobody could say we picked a return rate that was too small. That would be pretty neat if you rebuilt New Jersey and New York and Connecticut's infrastructure, particularly its broadband and its energy infrastructure with this model. That would be pretty neat.
Other question?
Yes, you mentioned this Digital Transition Commission, which I guess would be independent of the FCC, for example.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
So, in one of your slides, I saw, I mean, there are a few things that implied NPRMs or other things for the FCC, but you didn't really say anything about what the FCC should do going forward, or NTIA, or for that matter, or other agencies. I'm just curious if that implies that, you know, there's a national broadband plan and just kind of keep going basically with that blueprint. If you had other bigger ideas of how the FCC needs to change in the coming years.
A very good question. I believe that Harold and I are the everybody we know wants to be the next FCC chairman except you and me. I think that's fair.
That's
pretty close.
Pretty close. 300 million people.
So we're not going to be the next FCC chair when and if the current chair decides to step down. So we did not try in this book to lay out a detailed program for the next FCC chair or for the president to task to the next chair. However, everything on this page, and I didn't speak to it, everything in this fine print consists of actions that do not require legislation, many of which do involve the FCC. So it's not a thoroughly fleshed out agenda, but there's a lot of different things in it. There's just too much here to take your time, up and going into. So maybe you'll forgive me if I just talk about one thing, the E-rate. So the E-rate is a charge on your the interstate portion of your telephone bill, something that's not as important as it used to be, but still is a significant number for pretty much everybody. And that charge goes to an administrative corporation, which then awards the money that it collects to school districts and libraries that provide matching grants, and it therefore pays for internet access in classrooms and libraries. It spent about $40 billion in the last 15 years, and is a major reason why young people in America are more digital savvy than any other similar cohort group in any big country in the world. I mention this because it needs to be changed, and I also mention it because it's fundamentally has a bipartisan root. Olympia Snowe gave a Republican senator, retiring Republican senator from Maine, gave a exit interview about 2 weeks ago, and she was asked the predictable question when you retire after a long career of public service, what are the things you're most proud of? And she named two things, and one of the two things was her work in making sure that there was an E-rate. Well, Jim and I spent a lot of time working with her and her staff, and I think that Jim would agree with me. And if we were able to say to her, you know, God bless you, you really do deserve all the credit in the world, because she was a huge leader, and she went so far as calling all the commissioners at the FCC in the night of our regulatory decision and persuading them all to do the right thing in the regulation as well. But time has passed, and that program now needs to be updated. The E-rate really needs to empower schools to move to a next generation of digitization. And the FCC can do that. And it would be wonderful if the next chair said, I really want to do that.
Well, with that, Reed, let me thank you very much for coming to the Center for the Economics of the Internet.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for doing that. Very kind of you.